Imagine this. You are Anna Schwartz, a widow in your 40s, standing in your small cottage in Würzburg, Germany, on a cold morning in October 1628. Your hands tremble as you hear the heavy boots of the Prince Bishop's guards approaching your door. Through the frost-covered window, you can see your neighbor Margaret pointing directly at your home, her face twisted with satisfaction. 3 days ago, her cow died after drinking from the stream that runs past your garden. Yesterday, her husband developed a fever. This morning, she went to the authorities with an accusation that will destroy everything you know. The knock on your door echoes like thunder. You know what comes next because you've watched it happen to 6 other women in your village this year alone. None of them came home. What you don't know yet is that the systematic machinery of witch prosecution has already determined your fate. The moment Margaret spoke your name to the witch commissioner, you stopped being a person and became evidence of demonic conspiracy. The door splinters open before you can reach it. The transformation from ordinary woman to accused witch happened with terrifying speed in the German territories during the 1620s and 1630s. The peak decades of the European witch hunts that would claim an estimated 60,000 lives. The accusations rarely began with supernatural events. Instead, they emerged from the mundane conflicts of village life: a property dispute between neighbors, a rejected marriage proposal, competition between midwives for clients, economic jealousy toward women who inherited land or managed successful businesses, personal grudges that festered for years before finding expression in witchcraft charges. In Würzburg alone, Prince Bishop Philipp Adolf von Ehrenberg had established an efficient system for processing accusations that treated women as guilty until proven innocent, which was impossible. The city maintained a special prison called the Drudenhaus, the Witch House, built specifically to hold accused women during their interrogation. By 1629, this prison held over 200 women awaiting trial, crammed into cells designed for 50. The profile of accused witches reveals the systematic nature of persecution. You were most vulnerable if you were a widow without male protection, controlling property that relatives wanted to inherit. If you practiced folk medicine or midwifery, providing health care that sometimes failed despite your best efforts. If you were too poor and depended on neighbors' charity, creating resentment. If you were too wealthy and independent, threatening male economic dominance. If you had conflicts with authority or spoke your mind to men who expected deference. If you survived while others suffered misfortune, suggesting you had caused their problems through supernatural means. The accusation process followed predictable patterns that turned ordinary women into scapegoats for community anxieties. Your accuser would report you to the local priest or magistrate, claiming you had caused specific harm through witchcraft. The authorities would investigate by questioning other villagers about your reputation and behavior. Once 2 or 3 people confirmed suspicious activity, even innocent actions reinterpreted through fearful eyes, formal charges would be filed. The Prince Bishop's witch commissioners maintained lists of indicators proving demonic alliance. These included owning cats, especially black ones, living alone without male supervision, knowing herbal remedies that seemed too effective, surviving when others died during plague outbreaks, having birthmarks or moles that could be interpreted as devil's marks, speaking to yourself or your animals, suggesting conversations with demons, being argumentative or refusing to show proper submission to male authority. The interrogation began the moment guards dragged you from your home to the Drudenhaus. The journey itself served as public humiliation as neighbors gathered to watch your arrest. Some would spit at you, others would throw refuse or stones. Former friends would turn away, afraid that association with an accused witch might bring suspicion upon themselves. Children who played with your grandchildren yesterday would be pulled inside by frightened parents. The witch prison in Würzburg was a converted tower with stone walls 3 feet thick and windows too narrow for escape. The guards shoved you into a cell already occupied by 5 other women, all accused, all awaiting interrogation. The stench of unwashed bodies and human waste overwhelmed your senses. One woman huddled in the corner, her fingers broken from previous questioning. Another had burn marks across her arms from the heated metal test. A third sobbed continuously, already broken by what she had experienced in the interrogation chamber below. They told you what to expect, their voices hollow with trauma and terror. First would come the stripping, where male guards and the witch finder would examine every inch of your body searching for the devil's mark. Any mole, birthmark, scar, or skin imperfection would be tested by pricking with a special needle. If you didn't bleed or feel pain because the area had poor circulation or natural insensitivity, this proved demonic protection. If you did bleed and scream, they would continue testing other marks until they found one that satisfied their requirements for evidence. The formal interrogation followed procedures detailed in the Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches, published in 1487 by Heinrich Kramer. This handbook provided interrogators with specific questions, torture techniques, and legal justifications for extracting confessions. The manual assumed women were inherently weaker and more susceptible to demonic seduction, making them natural witches. It instructed interrogators to begin with verbal questioning, asking when you first made your pact with the devil, how many children you had killed through witchcraft, which neighbors you had cursed, what sexual acts you performed with demons during nocturnal Sabbaths, whether you flew through the air on broomsticks or transformed into animals. The questions presumed guilt, structured so that any answer could be interpreted as confirmation of witchcraft. If you denied making a pact with Satan, you were lying to protect your demonic master. If you admitted anything, you were confessing to witchcraft. If you remained silent, your refusal to cooperate proved demonic influence preventing you from speaking truth. When verbal questioning failed to produce the required confession, the interrogators escalated to physical persuasion. The swimming test came first, a procedure based on the belief that water, being pure and used in baptism, would reject a witch's corrupted body. Guards bound your right thumb to your left toe and your left thumb to your right toe, forcing your body into a contorted position. They attached a rope around your waist and threw you into the river or a deep pond. If you floated, the water's rejection proved your guilt. If you sank, you were innocent, though you might drown before they pulled you out. Most women floated because the trapped air in their clothing created buoyancy, and their desperate attempts to keep their heads above water created movement interpreted as supernatural levitation. Those who sank were often pulled out too late, dying from the drowning that proved their innocence. For you, Anna Schwartz, the swimming test took place in the main river in November, when ice formed along the banks. The freezing water shocked your system as you hit the surface. Your bound limbs made swimming impossible. The heavy woolen dress soaked with water dragged you down, but your body's natural buoyancy and your desperate thrashing kept your head above water for precious seconds before the guards decided you had floated long enough to prove guilt. They hauled you out, blue-lipped and shaking, and dragged you back to the interrogation chamber for the next phase. Sleep deprivation represented one of the most effective torture methods because it required no special equipment and left no permanent physical marks. Guards kept you awake for days, sometimes weeks, through constant noise, periodic beatings, and forced standing. When exhaustion made you collapse, they threw water on you or jabbed you with sharp sticks. The lack of sleep created hallucinations and confusion that interrogators exploited, suggesting you saw demons because demons were actually present. Your desperate need for rest made you vulnerable to leading questions and false memories. After 5 days without sleep, you might confess to anything just for the chance to lie down. The strappado came next when sleep deprivation failed to produce satisfactory details. This torture involved tying your hands behind your back, attaching the rope to a pulley system, and hoisting you off the ground by your wrists. The weight of your body pulled your shoulders from their sockets, creating agony that made you scream until your voice gave out. Interrogators let you hang for varying periods, sometimes adding weights to your feet for increased pain, before lowering you for questioning. If you still refused to confess, they raised you again. Most women's shoulders were permanently damaged after one session. Multiple sessions left victims unable to use their arms for the rest of their lives, however long that might be. The thumb screws applied crushing pressure to your fingers, slowly increasing until bones cracked. Interrogators tightened the screws gradually while asking questions, loosening them slightly when you began to provide answers they wanted. This created a cruel dynamic where relief from pain came only through confession. The psychological torture of choosing between continued agony and admitting to impossible crimes broke even the strongest women. Your fingers would never heal properly, but that seemed irrelevant when you faced burning at the stake anyway. The rack stretched your body on a wooden frame, pulling your limbs in opposite directions until joints separated and ligaments tore. The torturer controlled the tension, slowly increasing pressure while the interrogator asked detailed questions about your supposed crimes. The combination of physical agony and psychological pressure to end the pain by confessing proved devastatingly effective. Women who survived rack torture often suffered permanent disability, unable to walk or use their arms. But survival itself was rare once you reached this stage of interrogation. The heated iron test involved branding marks into your flesh while interrogators demanded confessions. The smell of your own burning skin filled the chamber. The pain exceeded anything human beings should endure. Most women confessed to whatever the interrogators suggested just to make it stop. The confessions obtained through torture followed predictable patterns because interrogators asked leading questions based on the Malleus Maleficarum's descriptions of witchcraft. You would confess to making a pact with the devil, who appeared in various forms like a black dog, a goat, or a handsome man. You admitted attending nocturnal Sabbaths where witches gathered to worship Satan through obscene rituals and sexual acts. You named other witches who attended these gatherings, often under torture that wouldn't stop until you provided names. These forced accusations created cascading waves of arrests as each confession implicated more women. You described killing children through curses or poisoned food. You admitted causing crop failures, livestock diseases, and human illnesses through malevolent magic. You confessed to flying through the air, transforming into animals, and having sexual relations with demons. None of these confessions reflected reality. All of them reflected the interrogator's expectations and your desperate need to end unbearable pain. The trial itself was a theatrical performance with a predetermined outcome. By the time you stood before the judges, your confession had already been recorded, extracted through torture but presented in court as voluntary admission. The legal procedures technically required evidence beyond confession, but the witch finders had developed extensive lists of corroborating proof. Your neighbor's testimony about the dead cow. Your possession of herbs used in folk medicine, reinterpreted as ingredients for harmful potions. Your cat, now evidence of a demonic familiar. Your solitary lifestyle, proof of antisocial behavior suggesting witchcraft. The fact that you floated during the swimming test, demonstrating the water's rejection of your corrupted body. The devil's mark found during the humiliating body search, a mole on your back that didn't bleed when pricked. The trial in Würzburg followed the procedures established by Prince Bishop Philipp Adolf von Ehrenberg, who had appointed professional witch commissioners to process the growing number of cases. These commissioners received payment for each conviction, creating a financial incentive to find women guilty. The proceedings took place in the Great Hall of the Bishop's Palace, with you standing in chains before a panel of judges. No defense attorney represented you because providing defense for an accused witch risked being accused of witchcraft yourself. The judges read your confession aloud, describing in graphic detail the crimes you had supposedly committed. They presented the evidence against you, each piece carefully selected to support the predetermined verdict. They allowed you to speak, but anything you said could only confirm guilt. If you maintained your innocence, you were lying. If you confirmed your confession, you were admitting guilt. If you claimed the confession was forced through torture, You were attempting to deceive the court through Satan's influence. Now that you have witnessed how ordinary disputes became death sentences and how torture transformed innocent women into confessed witches, you're beginning to see patterns hidden in history's shadows. If uncovering these buried truths about systematic persecution resonates with your curiosity about the real human experience behind historical events, subscribing ensures you never miss these deep dives into history's most guarded secrets. The stories waiting ahead will challenge everything you thought you knew about justice and how power constructs narratives through violence. The verdict came swiftly because these courts never acquitted accused witches. Acquittal would suggest the authorities had made a mistake, undermining their entire system of persecution. The only possible outcomes were conviction and execution, with variations in how the execution would be carried out. The judges found you guilty of witchcraft, devil worship, murder through supernatural means, and attending demonic Sabbaths. They sentenced you to death by burning, the traditional punishment for heresy and witchcraft. The sentence included confiscation of all your property, which the church and civil authorities would divide. This economic incentive had fueled many accusations, as wealthy widows made particularly profitable targets. Your remaining family would be left destitute, branded with the shame of having a witch among their relatives. Some jurisdictions showed mercy by strangling condemned witches before burning them, sparing them the agony of burning alive. But Würzburg's authorities believed that witches should suffer in flames to purify their corrupted bodies and serve as warnings to others. Your execution would be public, held in the town square where maximum crowds could witness the wages of witchcraft. The executioner led you from the prison to the square, where guards had erected a tall wooden stake surrounded by bundles of wood and kindling. The crowd that gathered included your former neighbors, some weeping, others shouting accusations, many simply curious about the spectacle of death. Children perched on their parents' shoulders for better views. Merchants sold food and drink to spectators. Street preachers delivered sermons about God's judgment against witches and the importance of maintaining vigilance against demonic influence in the community. The guards tied you to the stake with rough ropes that bit into your flesh. The executioner piled wood and straw around your feet, building the pyre carefully to ensure it would burn hot and long. A priest approached, offering one final chance to confess and repent, promising that sincere contrition might save your soul even if it couldn't save your body. You had nothing left to confess that you hadn't already admitted under torture. The priest made the sign of the cross and stepped back. The executioner applied the torch to the kindling. The fire caught quickly, fed by dry wood and pitch-soaked straw. The flames climbed rapidly, first scorching your feet, then your legs. The heat became unbearable before the flames actually reached your body. Your clothes ignited, and suddenly you were engulfed in fire. The pain exceeded anything you had experienced during interrogation. The smoke choked your lungs as you tried to scream. Your skin blistered and blackened. Your hair caught fire in a bright burst of flame. The crowd watched in fascinated horror as your body convulsed in the flames. Some spectators fainted, others vomited. Many prayed. Some laughed nervously, uncomfortable with their role as witnesses to judicial murder. The fire consumed your body over the course of an hour, the flames gradually reducing flesh to ash. When the fire finally died down, guards collected your remains and scattered them in the river so no relics could be used for sympathetic magic. Your property was distributed among the authorities who had prosecuted you, with the largest share going to the prince-bishop's treasury. Your daughter was forbidden from inheriting anything and forced to leave Würzburg within 3 days. The systematic persecution of women as witches reached its peak in the German territories during the 30 Years' War, when social chaos and religious conflict created the perfect conditions for scapegoating. The Würzburg trials of 1626 to 1631 resulted in the execution of over 900 people, most of them women. The Bishop of Bamberg, Johann Georg the Lagend Fuchs von Dornheim, earned the nickname the Witch Bishop for his zealous prosecution of supposed witches, building a special torture chamber called the Witch House that processed accused women with industrial efficiency. Between 1623 and 1632, Bamberg executed over 600 women, their property enriching the bishop's coffers while their deaths supposedly cleansed the territory of demonic influence. The cascade effect of forced confessions meant that each execution led to more accusations as dying women named others to end their torture. Entire families were destroyed. Villages lost significant portions of their female populations. The persecutions created trauma that echoed through generations, as children watched their mothers burn, and communities internalized the message that women's independence, knowledge, or nonconformity merited death. The economic motivations became increasingly obvious as wealthy widows and successful businesswomen were accused at higher rates than poor women, with their property conveniently enriching the authorities who condemned them. The witch hunts finally declined in the late 17th century, not because authorities developed mercy or reason, but because the persecution had become so extreme that it threatened social stability. When accusations began targeting wealthy merchants' wives and even the relatives of judges themselves, the upper classes recognized that the machinery of persecution had grown beyond their control. Gradually, territories began restricting witch trials, requiring higher standards of evidence, and eventually abolishing witchcraft as a capital crime. The last legal execution for witchcraft in Germany occurred in 1775, though illegal killings of accused witches continued into the 19th century. The women who died in the witch hunts left few records beyond their confessions extracted through torture and the bureaucratic documentation of their trials and executions. Their actual lives, their real thoughts and feelings, their genuine experiences disappeared into historical silence. What survived were the records created by their persecutors, documents that reveal more about their accusers' fears and greed than about the victims themselves. Modern historians estimate that between 40,000 and 60,000 people were executed for witchcraft in Europe, with women representing approximately 75 to 80% of victims. The German territories, where you lived and died as Anna Schwartz, accounted for roughly half of all executions. The systematic nature of persecution, the legal framework supporting it, the financial incentives driving it, and the theological justifications legitimizing it all combined to create one of history's most organized campaigns of violence against women. You came into this story thinking witch hunts were about superstition and ignorance, and now you leave understanding they were systematic campaigns of control that used supernatural accusations to justify violence against women who threatened male authority or possessed property that others wanted. This transformation of perspective is exactly why these hidden histories matter. If this journey of discovery has awakened your appetite for truth about how power operates behind official narratives, subscribing means you'll continue accessing these revelations that textbooks won't teach. Your curiosity about the real mechanisms of oppression deserves to be fed with evidence from voices that history tried to silence. The cold morning in October 1628, when guards came to Anna Schwartz's door, marked not an aberration, but a typical day in territories where authorities had industrialized the persecution of women through witch trials. The bureaucratic efficiency with which the system processed accusations, extracted confessions, and executed victims reveals that this was never about combating supernatural evil, but about maintaining power structures through fear and violence. The women who burned at the stakes throughout the German territories during those decades were not witches, but scapegoats sacrificed to systems that profited from their deaths and communities that channeled their anxieties into persecution. Their screams echo across centuries as reminders that the impulse to destroy those who don't conform or who threaten existing power arrangements remains a constant danger requiring eternal vigilance. The ashes scattered in rivers and the properties seized by authorities tell the real story of the witch hunts, one written not in spells and demons but in economics and control. The accusations of witchcraft served as convenient tools for eliminating women who owned property, practiced medicine, lived independently, or simply offended powerful neighbors. The torture chambers produced the confessions that authorities needed to justify predetermined verdicts. The public executions demonstrated what happened to women who existed outside acceptable boundaries. This was not justice, but systematic femicide disguised as religious duty and legal procedure, a truth that history tried to bury beneath myths about supernatural panic and medieval ignorance.